My girlfriend tried to provoke me with her challenging stare, but I refused to take the bait, told her the conversation was over, then turned around and walked away. Hey Reddit, my name is Tyler, and I'm 28 years old. Until recently, I was living what most people would call the dream life. I work as a marketing manager at a decent company here in Miami, making good money that allows me to afford a nice apartment and a decent car. From the outside looking in, everything appears perfect. The kind of life people scroll past on social media and feel a twinge of envy about. I moved to Miami a couple of years back specifically for this job opportunity, and I've never regretted that decision once. The eternal sunshine and beautiful beaches fit perfectly with my lifestyle and personality. It's exactly the kind of place where I always imagine myself building a life. But right now, as I sit here in my car in the garage, none of that matters. The door just closed behind me with this hollow metallic rattle that somehow feels way louder than it should. My hands are still clenched tight on the steering wheel, and I can hear the leather groaning under the pressure of my grip. I can't seem to move, can't even manage to blink. I'm just sitting here staring through the windshield at absolutely nothing, parked in my own driveway like some stranger who's lost and trying to figure out where he belongs. It's strange how you can look at your own life from the outside sometimes. The house looks exactly the same as it does every other day. Lights on, porch quiet and welcoming. Vanessa's Honda is sitting in its usual spot, perfectly aligned like always. But something feels fundamentally wrong, like walking into a familiar room that's been rearranged just slightly enough to make you trip over furniture you've navigated around for years. I step out of the car slowly, each movement feeling deliberate and foreign. The key clicks in the door with its familiar sound, and from inside I can hear the dishwasher humming its usual evening cycle. But then there's that other sound, the soft, distinctive chime of her phone buzzing with notifications. That goddamn sound that started grating at me over these last few months like nails scraping under my skin. She used to leave her phone anywhere and everywhere, kitchen counter, bathroom vanity, half-charged and forgotten on random surfaces throughout the house. But lately, it's always face down, always locked with a passcode I don't know, and always within arm's reach no matter where she is or what she's doing. She's not in the kitchen where she usually is at this time of evening, and she's not curled up on the couch either. But I can see that the bathroom door is closed, and I hear the unmistakable tap-tap-tap of fingers typing out a message, followed by soft laughter, the kind of quiet, intimate laugh that makes my stomach clench with a feeling I don't want to name. I stand outside that bathroom door for exactly 9 seconds. That number matters because I counted every single one of them, marking time like a death row inmate. On the 10th second, I finally work up the courage to knock. Complete silence. Then her voice comes through the door, overly casual and slightly breathless. Yeah? I ask if she wants some tea, trying to make my voice sound normal and caring. She says no without any warmth or interest, so I walk away. It's such a stupid, passive moment, but it's stuck with me ever since. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't happen. There was no warmth in her voice, no curiosity about my day, no affection. She used to light up when I came home from work, even if she pretended not to care that much. Now it feels like she's managing me, like my presence is just something inconvenient that she has to navigate around. The first real fracture in our relationship happened about a week earlier, and it was one of those moments that seems insignificant until you realize it was actually everything. We were sitting in the living room watching TV together, or at least I was watching TV. She was on her phone as always, completely absorbed in whatever was happening on that screen, occasionally smiling at something that clearly wasn't the show we had on. Curiosity got the better of me, so I asked what was so funny. Instead of showing me or laughing about it together like she used to do, she turned the screen slightly away from me. It wasn't an obvious, dramatic gesture, just a subtle half-second shift that most people probably wouldn't even notice. But I noticed. Just a meme you wouldn't get, she said dismissively, not even looking up at me. No big deal, right? People have private jokes and inside references all the time. But it was the third time that exact scenario had played out that week. The third time she'd received something that made her smile, and then deliberately kept it from me when I showed interest. That's when I started watching more carefully. I'm not proud of it, but I began paying attention to patterns I'd been unconsciously ignoring. I started remembering the days she wore perfume, even though she claimed she was just meeting the girls for coffee. I noticed the way she'd come home flushed and distracted, her hair slightly messed up, saying things about her day that didn't quite match the timeline she'd given me earlier. One particular incident stands out. She told me she'd spent the afternoon with Ashley at some new coffee shop they wanted to try. She went into detail about the latte she ordered and how crowded the place was. But later that evening, I saw that Ashley had posted photos from her solo workout at the gym, time-stamped during the exact hours Vanessa claimed they were together. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. I told myself there were reasonable explanations, that I was being paranoid and jealous for no good reason. But deep down, I had already started cataloging every inconsistency. Every message that got answered in another room, every call she took outside, every shift in her tone when certain names came up in conversation, every slip in her carefully constructed stories about where she'd been and who she'd been with. I became like a ghost in my own house, silently watching her move through our shared space, watching her smile and laugh and lie with such practiced ease that I started to question my own memory and judgment. The worst part wasn't even the deception itself. It was that she didn't notice my growing distance and suspicion. She was so absorbed in whatever secret life she was building that she didn't even see me anymore. I was disappearing, and she couldn't have cared less. Then came the moment when everything split clean down the middle, the night that shattered any remaining illusions I had about our marriage. Last night, she was out again, supposedly with coworkers for some after-work drinks and dinner. It had become such a regular occurrence that I barely questioned it anymore. Or maybe I'd just gotten tired of asking questions that never got straight answers. Around 9 o'clock, I called just to hear her voice and see how her evening was going. She didn't answer, which wasn't unusual, but it still left me with that familiar knot in my stomach. 15 minutes later, I got a text from her. "Can't talk. Loud here." I replied with, "All good, have fun," but I didn't mean it. The words felt hollow and fake, just like everything else between us had become. I sat in the dark living room with a glass of whiskey that was too strong and burned going down. But I needed something to numb the growing anxiety that was eating me alive. That's when I made a decision I once swore I'd never make. I opened the location tracking app on our shared family account, the one we'd set up years ago for practical reasons, back when trust wasn't even a question between us. She'd forgotten to log out of the family sharing, and her location was right there, a blinking dot on the map that held all the answers I was afraid to know. Her phone wasn't at the restaurant she'd mentioned, the one where she claimed her coworkers always went for their monthly get-togethers. Instead, it was across town on some quiet residential street I'd never heard her mention, not even in passing. I stared at that blinking dot for 20 straight minutes, watching it remain completely stationary. Not the kind of brief stop you'd make to pick something up or drop something off. She was parked there like she was comfortable, like she belonged there, like she had every right to be in some stranger's driveway while lying to her husband about where she was spending her evening. I didn't drive there that night. Not yet. I wanted more evidence, needed to be absolutely certain before I did something I couldn't take back. I was already halfway over the cliff, but I wasn't ready to fall until I could see exactly what rocks were waiting for me at the bottom. At 11:17 p.m., the dot started moving across the map. At 2:03 a.m., I heard her car pull into our driveway with its familiar engine sound. At 2:08 a.m., she came through the side door like a thief sneaking into her own house, heels in her hand to muffle her footsteps, makeup slightly smudged around the edges in a way that told me everything I needed to know. She looked genuinely surprised to see me still awake, sitting there in the dim light of the kitchen. I didn't say a word, just looked at her, really looked at her, taking in every detail of her disheveled appearance and guilty body language. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain where she'd been or why she was so late. She didn't even try to make up another lie to cover the obvious gaps in her story. Instead, she just tilted her head slightly, gave me that practiced smile I was starting to hate, and said, "What?" like I was the one being unreasonable. My throat tightened and my pulse started thumping like a war drum in my chest. In that moment, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I just felt this overwhelming emptiness, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything that used to matter. She walked past me without another glance, phone already back in her hand, fingers typing away at messages I'd never be allowed to see. She didn't even bother going upstairs to bed. Instead, she just dropped onto the couch, curled her legs up under herself, and let the screen's glow wash over her face like the reflection of all her secrets. That's when I knew with absolute certainty. She wanted me to know what she was doing. Not directly, not with explicit evidence or confessions, but she wanted me to feel it, to understand that I'd been replaced. She wanted to humiliate me without having to say the words out loud, to test how much degradation I'd accept before I finally broke. And when she glanced up at me once, casually checking to see if I was still watching her late-night texting session, her eyes said it all. She was daring me to do something about it. My eyes said back, clear as day, I'm done. I didn't sleep again that night. But it's strange how quickly your body adjusts to living in a state of war. I lay in bed right next to her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing and watching her continue to scroll through her phone in the darkness. The blue light from her screen cast shadows across her face while I stared at the ceiling, my eyes never closing once during those long, torturous hours. At 6:15 a.m., she rolled over toward me and murmured sleepily, "Why are you up so early?" Her voice had that syrupy quality she used when she was pretending to care, fake concern wrapped in morning breath and the lingering scent of deception. I told her simply that I couldn't sleep, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. She leaned over and kissed my shoulder gently, like absolutely nothing was wrong between us, like she hadn't spent the previous evening in someone else's bed. Then she asked if I could grab some almond milk on my way home from work later, because she was running low for her daily vanilla latte smoothies. Like that was all I needed to worry about today. Her damn morning routine. That morning, instead of going straight to the office, I drove directly to the address where her phone had been parked the night before. I honestly don't know what I expected to find there. Maybe the sight of him. This Blake person whose name I'd started hearing whispered in her sleep. Maybe her car still parked outside like some kind of smoking gun. Maybe a reason to kick down the front door and confront them both in a dramatic explosion of rage and betrayal. But the house was completely quiet and unremarkable. White siding, a blue porch swing that swayed slightly in the morning breeze, perfectly manicured lawn. It looked like every other middle-class home in the neighborhood. Completely ordinary except for the fact that it was now the setting of the biggest joke ever played on me. I sat there in my car with the engine running, fingers drumming against the steering wheel in a nervous rhythm I couldn't control. Then, as stupid as it sounds, I started laughing. Not the kind of laugh that comes from finding something genuinely funny, but the hysterical kind that bubbles up from somewhere rotten and desperate inside you. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. At that moment, I was just watching my entire life sink through the cracks like spilled coffee, seeping into hardwood floors, staining everything permanently. By the time I got back home, she was already gone. Off to a client meeting, she'd said in the note she left on the kitchen counter, written in that same elegant handwriting I used to think was so beautiful. Her laptop was sitting open on the dining room table, and I don't know if she'd left it there deliberately, or if she just didn't think I'd be home that early. Maybe she was getting sloppy with her lies, or maybe this was another test to see how far she could push me before I finally snapped. There was a folder buried on the desktop, hidden 3 layers deep under boring, professional-sounding names like invoices_2024 and client_exports. The kind of folders you'd scroll past without thinking twice about. But when I opened them, I found exactly what I was looking for and exactly what I was dreading. Inside were photos, screenshots, saved text message conversations, and even videos. She'd been documenting everything like some kind of twisted trophy collection. Images of her sitting in someone else's car, intimate selfies I'd never seen before, message threads that made my stomach turn with their casual cruelty. One message from Blake stood out like a slap across the face. "Can't wait to make you forget your husband again tonight." Her reply, sent just hours after she'd kissed my shoulder and asked about almond milk. "Already have." I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I methodically took pictures of everything with my phone, copied the entire folder to a flash drive, and backed it all up twice. Because somewhere deep down, I already knew exactly what I had to do, even if I wasn't ready to admit it to myself yet. And yet, despite having all the evidence I needed, the final confrontation didn't happen that day. It took another 4 days of living in this surreal state of knowing the truth while pretending everything was normal. 4 days of watching her perform the role of loving wife while I quietly gathered my strength for what I knew was coming. When it finally happened, she came home late again, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. It was tight, short, and definitely not her usual conservative style, unless she was trying to impress someone who wasn't her husband. She tossed her purse carelessly on the floor, kicked off her heels with obvious relief, and gave me that same casual glance she'd been giving me for months, like I was just another piece of furniture she had to navigate around. "Something wrong?" she asked, finally noticing that I hadn't moved from my position at the kitchen counter where I'd been waiting for over an hour. I pulled out my phone slowly and deliberately, scrolled to one specific photo, and showed it to her without saying a word. Just one image, her sitting in the front seat of Blake's car with his hand resting possessively on her thigh, both of them looking relaxed and intimate in a way that made my chest tighten with rage. She blinked once, looking at the screen for maybe 3 seconds. Then, instead of reaching for the phone or showing any sign of shock or remorse, she just looked back at me with her head tilted slightly to one side. "So you've been spying on me now," she said, her voice completely flat and matter-of-fact. No denial, no guilt, no shame. No desperate attempt to explain or justify what I was seeing. Just an immediate counterattack designed to make me the villain in her story. "That's your response?" I asked, genuinely stunned by her audacity. She walked calmly to the refrigerator, poured herself a glass of water, took a long sip, and then simply shrugged her shoulders like we were discussing something as mundane as the weather. "I knew you'd find out eventually," she said with chilling casualness. "Honestly, I was just waiting to see how long you'd keep pretending everything was fine." "Pretending?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. She had the nerve to call it pretending, as if this entire nightmare was somehow my fault, as if I had been complicit in her betrayal simply by not confronting her sooner. "You could have left," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You could have told me you were unhappy. You could have asked for a divorce." She rolled her eyes in that dismissive way that had always made me feel small, but now it just made me furious. "And make it easy for you, please?" Her tone was dripping with contempt. "You would have just played the victim and made me look like the bad guy." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab something and throw it across the room. I wanted to unleash all the rage and hurt and betrayal that had been building up inside me for months. But I didn't, because I could see exactly what she wanted. She was hoping for a big, dramatic blowout that she could later twist into a story that made her the victim of an unstable, controlling husband. So instead, I said absolutely nothing. I stood up calmly, walked upstairs, and grabbed a duffel bag from the closet. I packed only the bare essentials: phone charger, a few changes of clothes, my passport, and my wallet. The things I'd need to start over somewhere else. When I came back downstairs, she was still sitting in the same spot, still scrolling through her phone like nothing significant was happening. I walked past her toward the front door without a word. "Where are you going?" she asked, finally looking up from her screen. "To remind myself who the hell I am," I said, my hand already on the doorknob. "And who the hell I'm not." She laughed then, a bitter, mocking sound that filled the entire room like poison gas. "You're not strong enough to leave me," she said with absolute certainty. "You'll come crawling back within a week." I didn't respond to that. I just let the door click shut behind me, her cruel laughter still ringing in my ears as I walked away from the only home I'd known for years. The motel I found was cheap, but not the kind with bedbugs or flickering neon lights that you see in movies. It was just the kind of place where no one asks questions, and the ice machine is perpetually broken. I sat on the edge of the bed with my duffel bag at my feet, staring at the outdated wallpaper like it might somehow peel back and reveal some kind of answer to how my life had gotten to this point. But all it gave me was the overwhelming smell of industrial bleach and the kind of silence that forces you to confront everything you've been avoiding. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not friends, not family, not even my brother who I usually called when things got rough. Hell, I hadn't even said the words out loud to myself. My wife is cheating on me? The words felt too big, too final, too real to exist outside my own head. This was Vanessa we were talking about. The same woman who used to kiss my eyelids gently when I had migraines because she said it was the only thing that really helped. The woman who actually cried when I built her a custom bookshelf for her birthday because she said it meant more to her than anything I could have bought from a store. That same woman had looked me directly in the face 3 days ago and laughed as she systematically shattered everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. I stayed in that motel room for 4 nights straight. I didn't eat much during that time. Just whatever I could grab from vending machines or the gas station across the street. I didn't sleep at all the first night, just kept replaying every moment, every conversation, every look and smirk and carefully constructed lie dressed up in sweetness and concern. She had played me like it was some kind of elaborate sport, and I was just now realizing I'd never even known the rules of the game. That was the part I couldn't swallow, not just the cheating itself, but the sheer level of performance involved. The manipulation, the calculated cruelty, the way she had turned my natural confusion and growing suspicion into comedy for her own entertainment. She had called my silence pretending, like I was too stupid or cowardly to face the obvious truth. So she had to keep entertaining herself with increasingly bold lies until I finally caught up to what she'd been doing all along. On the second night, I finally worked up the courage to send a message to Ashley, Vanessa's best friend, and the supposed alibi for half of those mysterious evenings out. I kept it simple and direct. Did Vanessa ever actually meet you on the 16th or the 23rd? The message showed as read immediately, but there was no reply. Then, exactly 15 minutes later, my phone rang. Ashley's name on the screen, and when I answered, I could hear that her voice was trembling. She didn't even ask how I was doing or try to make small talk. She just whispered, "Tyler, I'm so sorry." I said nothing, just waited for her to continue. "She's been seeing someone for a while now," Ashley confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't want to lie to you, but she begged me not to say anything. She said she needed time to figure things out, and I swear I never thought it would go on this long." Figure things out. That was rich. So Vanessa had cast an entire net of lies, dragged her closest friends into her deception, and staged complete evenings just to keep her elaborate show running smoothly. This wasn't some impulsive mistake or drunken slip-up. It was architecture, intentional, calculated, and designed to make me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong. I hung up without saying goodbye to Ashley. There was nothing left to say. The next day, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to hide anymore, wasn't going to let her slither away from this situation untouched while painting herself as the victim. I wasn't going to allow her to control the narrative while everyone else remained completely unaware of what she really was beneath that carefully crafted exterior. So I went back home. Not to talk, not to argue, not to give her another opportunity to manipulate the situation. I went back to gather what I needed: evidence, important documents, bank statements, anything that would protect me in whatever came next. Her face barely changed when I walked through the front door. She was sprawled across the couch with her legs tucked up under her, watching some mindless reality show like it was any other ordinary evening. She just glanced over casually and said, "Look who's back," without even pausing whatever she was watching. No surprise, no apology, no acknowledgement that anything significant had happened between us. Just that same dismissive tone she'd been using for months. I didn't answer her. I just went straight upstairs to our bedroom and started methodically sorting through folders, USB drives, and important papers. She followed me eventually, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed while I worked, watching me like I was some kind of interesting television program. "You don't have to do this," she said after a few minutes of silence. I didn't look up from what I was doing. "Do what?" "This whole dramatic exit scene you're staging. Everyone makes mistakes, Tyler. Maybe we can figure it out if you just calm down and think rationally about this." I almost laughed out loud. Almost. Here was a woman who had maintained a full-scale double life for months, who had backup lies prepared for her original lies, who had manipulated everyone around her into being accomplices in her deception. And now she wanted to play marriage counselor and talk about working things out. I turned around and looked her directly in the eye. "A mistake is forgetting our anniversary," I said slowly and clearly. "What you did. That's a calculated campaign designed to humiliate me." She blinked, and for the first time since I discovered everything, I think she realized that I wasn't bluffing, wasn't playing games, and wasn't going to be manipulated back into submission. "You're seriously going to walk away?" she asked, and I could hear genuine surprise creeping into her voice. "After everything we've built together?" "Everything!" I repeated, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. "You mean the lies, the gaslighting, the nights you came home still glowing from someone else's hands and then asked me to rub your back like I was your emotional support pet?" She rolled her eyes again, that same gesture that had made me feel small and unreasonable for years. "You're being overly dramatic about this whole situation." No, I wasn't being dramatic. For the first time in months, I was finally being completely clear about what had actually happened between us. I left the house that day without slamming the door, without shouting, without giving her the big emotional scene she seemed to be expecting. Just quiet and final, like closing the cover of a book I'd never need to read again. I didn't hear from her that night, but the next day, that's when things really started to escalate in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was halfway through a terrible cup of coffee at this grim little diner off Highway 95, trying to figure out what my next move should be, when my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood pressure spike instantly. "Vanessa, so you're telling people now? Real mature." There it was. I hadn't posted anything on social media, hadn't aired our dirty laundry publicly, hadn't done anything except have one honest conversation with Ashley. But apparently, Ashley had finally grown a conscience and told someone else. Or maybe Vanessa had just realized that the carefully constructed cracks in her story weren't going to hold up under scrutiny much longer. Either way, the mask was starting to slip, and Vanessa never did well when she wasn't in complete control of the situation. I ignored the message completely, but 7 minutes later, another one came through. Vanessa, you're acting like the victim in this, but you were never present in our marriage. You haven't been emotionally available for months. What did you expect me to do? And there it was again. The same deflection tactics she'd always used. She had cheated, lied systematically, manipulated everyone around her, and somehow, I was still the reason she decided to spread herself across someone else's passenger seat like a teenager with no self-respect. It was almost laughable, but more than that, it was strategic. She wasn't sorry, and she wasn't even pretending to be sorry anymore. She was already laying the groundwork for her version of events, preparing the narrative she'd tell to friends and family when they asked what happened between Tyler and me. He was distant and emotionally unavailable, she'd say. He made me feel unloved and neglected. I was confused and vulnerable, and I made a mistake. I tried to work things out, but he was too proud and angry to listen. I blocked her number. Not permanently, just for long enough to think clearly without her poisonous words clouding my judgment. Because every text message from her was another trap, another carefully designed twist in a psychological game I'd never agreed to play in the first place. That evening, I got a phone call that really opened my eyes to how deep this manipulation went. It was from Linda, Vanessa's mother. Linda and I had always maintained a somewhat shaky relationship. She'd never quite thought I was good enough for her precious daughter. But when I heard her voice trembling on the other end of the line, I expected some kind of concern or empathy, maybe even an attempt at peacekeeping. I was completely wrong. Vanessa told me what happened, Linda said, her voice dripping with disappointment and accusation. She said you walked out on her and started spreading malicious stories about her character. She told me she begged you to sit down and talk through your problems like adults, but you wouldn't even listen to her side of things. My throat closed up completely. I asked as calmly as I could manage, did she also mention the affair? There was a long pause, and then Linda said that the situation was complicated, and that I shouldn't be airing private matters to people who didn't understand the full context. Complicated. My wife's systematic betrayal was just complicated. I felt something fundamental breaking inside me at that moment. This woman, my wife, the person who was supposed to love and protect me, was already hard at work rebuilding her entire castle of lies, brick by brick. She was making absolutely sure that when the smoke finally cleared from this disaster, she'd still have her kingdom intact, even if it meant burning me down to the ground to achieve it. She didn't just want me silent and ashamed and isolated. She wasn't just trying to win some kind of contest. She was actively trying to erase me from the story entirely, to rewrite history so completely that I became the villain in my own marriage. So I stopped hiding completely. I called my brother first and told him everything. Every detail, every lie, every moment of gaslighting and manipulation. Then I called my best friend Chris, who had always said that Vanessa was unnaturally good at winning arguments and controlling conversations, though he'd never been able to put his finger on exactly why that bothered him. One by one, I methodically peeled the truth open like an infected wound and let people look inside and see what had really been happening behind the facade of our perfect marriage. And you know what I discovered? Most of them weren't shocked at all. It turned out that a lot of people had noticed things over the years. They'd seen the way she belittled me in front of others, always with a smile so it seemed like playful teasing. They'd watched how she controlled every single conversation, steering it away from topics that didn't interest her or redirecting attention back to herself whenever someone else was getting too much focus. They'd noticed how her attention constantly flicked around any room we were in, always scanning for someone more interesting, more successful, more useful to her social climbing ambitions. The reason they'd never said anything wasn't because they thought I was happy. It was because I'd worked so hard to appear happy, to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, that they didn't want to interfere with what looked like a functional relationship from the outside. But now that the truth was out, no one was rushing to defend her. And that made her absolutely furious. It took exactly 3 days for her retaliation campaign to begin in earnest. I got an email from HR at my company informing me that someone had submitted an anonymous complaint about my behavior. According to the complaint, I was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous, and there were concerns about my ability to maintain professional relationships with colleagues. They didn't say who had filed the complaint, of course. They didn't need to. I knew exactly who it was and exactly how she operated when someone dared to challenge her control over a situation. I recognized this pattern from her past relationships and friendships. Vanessa didn't just want to win. She wanted her opponents completely destroyed, their reputations in ruins, their support systems dismantled. She wasn't going to let me leave quietly with my dignity intact. She wanted me bloodied and broken, so that when she told her version of events later, she could point to my obvious instability as evidence of how difficult and unreasonable I'd always been. I had no choice but to stay completely calm and professional. I met with HR and showed them my phone with all the evidence, the messages, the photos, the timeline of her systematic deception. I presented everything in a clear, organized manner that demonstrated exactly who was actually unstable in this situation. They backed off immediately once they saw the documentation. That night, I received one final message from her, a long, carefully crafted text that revealed everything about her true character. You've made this situation so much worse than it ever had to be. We could have kept things civil and handled this like mature adults, but now you've ruined any chance of that happening. Don't bother coming back to the house. I've had the locks changed for my own safety and peace of mind. If you want to collect any of your remaining belongings, you'll have to coordinate through my lawyer. There it was. The final curtain call on our marriage. No apology, no acknowledgement of responsibility, no ownership of the pain she'd caused. Just one last calculated stab designed to make me look like the aggressor, as if I was somehow the threat to her safety. As if I had been the one who broke her trust, shattered our marriage vows, and dragged her good name through the mud. I sat with that message for a long time, in the silence of my motel room, still surrounded by the same bleached nothingness I'd been living in for over a week. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something sharp and clean cut through all the numbness and confusion. It was absolute clarity about what I needed to do next. I wasn't going back to that house, wasn't going to negotiate with the woman who had turned me into an unwilling accessory to her double life, and wasn't going to let her control one more minute of my future. This wasn't about saving our marriage anymore. This was about reclaiming my freedom and my self-respect. I found a lawyer the very next morning. No more waiting around, no more weighing my options or second-guessing what felt like the death of a decade-long relationship. His name was Robert Hayes, navy blue suit, blunt professional tone, and eyes that looked like they'd seen this exact story 1,000 times before. And maybe he had. He didn't flinch when I laid out all the details for him. Didn't blink at the screenshots, the fake alibis, the strategic lies, or the systematic manipulation. He just nodded thoughtfully and said, "All right, let's get you out of this cleanly. I want to be clear about something. I didn't want revenge." Let me say that again because it's important. I didn't want revenge, not really. I didn't want to take her for everything she had or systematically torture her world the way she tortured mine. I just wanted out of this toxic situation with my dignity intact. But I also wasn't going to walk away empty-handed while she played the wounded, abandoned wife with crocodile tears and a fresh replacement already warming her bed. I wasn't going to let her rewrite history so completely that I became the villain in a story where I'd been nothing but loyal and trusting. So we filed the divorce papers. No dramatic warning, no final emotional conversation, no last-ditch attempt at reconciliation. Just cold, hard legal paperwork served directly to her door at 9:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning. She called me exactly 18 minutes later. I didn't answer. She called again immediately. Then the text messages started coming in rapid-fire succession. Seriously? You're just going to blindside me like this? Is this because I changed the locks? I can explain that. I didn't cheat, not the way you think I did. Blake was just a distraction when I was feeling lost and confused. A distraction. My marriage, my trust, my emotional well-being, my entire sense of reality, all of it reduced to a distraction while she figured herself out at my expense. I didn't reply to any of it. That silence must have driven her absolutely crazy, because the next message represented a complete 180-degree shift in tone. "I'm sorry, and I really mean that. I know I messed up badly, but you don't have to end our entire relationship like this. We can talk through the situation like adults. We owe ourselves at least that much after everything we've been through together. No. What we had owed each other was honesty, respect, basic human decency, and fidelity. She had systematically torched all 4 of those foundations, and now she wanted to play therapist and relationship counselor. I spent the rest of that day moving my belongings into a short-term rental apartment. It was small and quiet, but it was clean and completely mine. A space without any echoes of her laughter, without the lingering smell of her shampoo in the towels, without the crushing psychological weight of constant suspicion hanging in the air like toxic mildew. The first night in that apartment was strange. I expected to break down completely, expected to cry or rage or crumble under the weight of what I'd lost. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I slept for 7 full, uninterrupted hours. No dreams, no sudden startles from anxiety, no lying awake replaying conversations and analyzing tone of voice. Just peaceful, restorative sleep. The next few days moved quickly as my lawyer got everything in motion. Friends offered couches, drinks, and angry affirmations of support. People who used to idolize our relationship as some kind of couple goals inspiration were now confessing how often they'd witnessed her subtle put-downs, her undermining comments, and her mean streak carefully hidden behind that dazzling public smile. It turned out she'd been fooling a lot more people than just me, but the facade was finally cracking for everyone to see. Then, just when I thought the dust was starting to settle and I could begin processing everything that had happened, there was another completely unexpected twist that I never saw coming. Blake reached out to me directly. No joke! He actually found me on Instagram and sent me a private message that completely blindsided me. Hey, I know you probably don't want to hear from me at all, but I didn't know she was married until it was way too late to back out of the situation. I ended it as soon as I found out the truth. I stared at my phone screen for a full minute, reading those words over and over again. He had ended it, as if that somehow fixed everything, as if his belated attack of conscience could undo months of systematic betrayal and deception. But he wasn't finished. The message continued. She told me you guys were basically separated and just hadn't made it official yet. She said you had completely checked out of the marriage emotionally and that you were living like roommates. I didn't find out the real truth about your relationship until after that night at my place when she left her phone unlocked and I saw some of your messages. I swear to you, I didn't mean for any of this to happen the way it did. I didn't respond to his message, but something inside me cracked open when I read it. She hadn't just been lying to me throughout this entire nightmare. She had been lying to him too, spinning completely different versions of reality depending on what she needed from each person in her life. She had built an entire personality out of strategic betrayal. She was like a chameleon, constantly shifting and adapting, playing the role of the devoted wife when it suited her, the neglected woman seeking comfort when she needed sympathy, the misunderstood soul trapped in a loveless marriage when she wanted to justify her actions. Whatever the situation demanded, she performed flawlessly, and we were all just unwitting props on the stage of her elaborate production. But I wasn't going to be a prop anymore. I was done being part of her performance. I blocked Blake's account immediately, not out of anger toward him specifically, but because I didn't need anything else from that toxic chapter of my life. His guilt wasn't my burden to carry, and his shame wasn't a currency I could spend on healing. What mattered now was focusing entirely on rebuilding myself and my future. I started running again for the first time in over a year. Within 2 weeks, I'd lost 12 pounds that I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I cut out the late-night drinking that had become a coping mechanism, stopped the endless mental spirals that kept me awake until 3 a.m. analyzing every conversation and interaction, and most importantly, I cut out the toxic idea that any of this disaster was somehow my fault. Here's what I learned. Vanessa didn't cheat because I was emotionally distant or unavailable. She cheated because she had never truly arrived in our relationship in the first place. She had always kept one foot out the door, always been scanning for the next thrill, the next ego boost, the next man stupid enough to think that her restless energy could be tamed or satisfied. In every conversation we'd ever had, every celebration we'd shared, every quiet evening we'd spent making dinner together, she had been somewhere else mentally, always looking for something more exciting, more validating, more worthy of her attention than the steady, reliable love I'd been offering her. Well, let someone else try to fill that bottomless pit of need. Because I was already on the road back to discovering who I really was underneath all the damage she'd inflicted. It all started with a letter that arrived at my rental apartment. A real, physical letter with an actual stamp and everything. No text bubbles, no email headers, just cream-colored paper in an envelope with my name written in her distinctive handwriting. The same elegant script I used to think was so beautiful back when I believed her every move was genuine instead of calculated. The letter arrived exactly 6 days after the divorce papers had been officially served to her doorstep. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that perfectly encapsulated everything that was wrong with her approach to accountability. Tyler, I wish you would have given me just 5 minutes to explain before you made such a drastic decision. You think you know everything now, but you don't understand the full picture. I made mistakes, big ones, I'll admit that. But there was so much more going on than you ever saw or bothered to notice. You shut me out so fast that I didn't even get a chance to explain my side of things. I didn't plan to fall into something with Blake. I was confused and lost, and I felt completely invisible in our marriage. I needed something, and I didn't know how to ask you for it without seeming needy or demanding. I know I hurt you, but you hurt me too in ways you don't even realize. If there's any part of you that still believes in what we had together, what we built over all these years, I'm still here waiting. V. I read that letter twice, slowly and carefully. Then I started laughing. I laughed so hard that I had to sit down on my couch because I was getting lightheaded. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from genuine amusement. It was the kind that erupts from pure, unadulterated disbelief. Because only Vanessa could systematically light an entire house on fire, stand there watching it burn down to nothing but ash and foundation, then calmly mail you a matchbook and ask why you never tried putting out the flames. I didn't reply to her letter. I let it sit on my kitchen table for several days, just to remind myself of how far I'd come in terms of seeing through her manipulation tactics. But somehow she still wasn't done with her campaign to rewrite history. The very next day, I found out about her newest and most audacious move yet. She had told her entire family that I had left her for another woman. Let that sink in for a moment. After months of systematic lies, after betraying every promise she'd ever made to me, after gaslighting me to the point where I questioned my own sanity, she had the absolute nerve to flip the script completely and paint me as the cheating spouse. Her cousin Mark called me late that evening. He was a quiet guy who rarely spoke up about family drama, but he was the kind of person who watched and listened more than he talked, which made his observations particularly valuable. "She's been telling everyone that you'd been cheating for months," he said, his voice careful and measured. "She told the whole family that you were the one who broke her heart, that you were the one who refused to work on the marriage, and that you left without even trying to fix what was wrong between you two." I felt something dark and cold slide through my chest as I processed what he was telling me. Even now, weeks after I'd discovered her affair, weeks after I'd presented her with undeniable evidence of her betrayal, she wasn't trying to reconcile or make amends. She was actively trying to win some kind of twisted competition where the prize was public sympathy and the victim narrative. Every single move I made toward healing and moving forward, she was systematically twisting into a story that served her need to be seen as the wronged party. You simply cannot reason with someone who views every aspect of life as a courtroom drama, someone who cannot exist without turning every conversation into a closing argument designed to prove their innocence and your guilt. And then came the twist that made me realize just how deep this rabbit hole of manipulation actually went. My lawyer called me on a Tuesday morning with that carefully controlled tone that lawyers use when they're about to deliver news that's going to make your day significantly worse. "Her legal team sent us an early counterproposal to the divorce filing," Robert said, and I could hear the edge in his voice despite his professional composure. "She's contesting the divorce," he continued. "On what grounds?" I asked, already feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. "She's claiming emotional abandonment and seeking spousal support. She also wants to contest the asset division we proposed." I nearly dropped the phone. This woman who had systematically cheated on me, lied to my face for months, laughed at my pain, and kicked me out of my own home was now trying to bleed me financially dry on her way out the door. That's when something fundamental snapped inside me. Not rage, not panic, but something much sharper and more focused than either of those emotions. It was cold, calculated determination. I told my lawyer we'd fight this thing with everything we had. And then I made a phone call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Kevin, a guy I'd gone to college with who was now a systems engineer. Back in our school days, he'd been the absolute king of digital investigation. The guy who could track down anything and everything about anyone if you gave him enough motivation. "I need everything you can find on Blake," I said without preamble. "Full name, job, address, background, history. I want to know exactly what she risked our entire marriage for." Kevin delivered everything I'd asked for within 4 hours. I suddenly had a complete dossier on Blake Mason. 26 years old, works at a car dealership in the suburbs, lives in a shared apartment with 2 roommates, no college degree, and a documented trail of short-term relationships that never seemed to last more than a few months. Most interesting of all, there was a harassment complaint filed against him by an ex-girlfriend just last year, and a Reddit account he'd apparently forgotten to delete that painted him as significantly less than chivalrous in his approach to relationships. And she had called me emotionally unavailable. I gathered all of this information, dated it, organized it into a comprehensive file, and handed it over to my lawyer. No, I wasn't planning to blast it all over social media or sink to her level of public character assassination. But if she was going to try to play the victim in front of a judge, if she was seriously planning to come after my assets and financial security, then I was going to be ready with every piece of ammunition I could gather. The fundamental difference between us at this point was simple. I had absolutely nothing to hide anymore. She, on the other hand, had everything to lose if the full truth came out in a legal setting. And she had no idea what was coming her way. The courtroom was colder than I had expected it to be. Not the temperature, the entire atmosphere. You'd think that with everything laid bare, with years of lies finally peeled back, and the truth staring everyone directly in the face, the air would feel raw and emotionally charged. But instead, it was quiet and tense, like the room itself was holding its breath and waiting to see how this drama would finally resolve. Vanessa walked in late, which was absolutely typical for her. She had always made grand entrances whenever she wanted to demonstrate that she was the most important person in any given space. She wore that same calculated elegance she always deployed when she wanted to appear composed and sympathetic. Charcoal gray dress, subtle makeup that made her look vulnerable, hair twisted up in that effortlessly perfect style that I knew she'd practiced in the mirror for at least 20 minutes. She didn't glance in my direction, didn't flinch when she saw me sitting there, didn't look like someone whose entire life had been systematically cracked open and exposed in broad daylight. But I could see the subtle twitch in her jaw when she sat down, and the way her hand clenched involuntarily when she noticed the thick file that my lawyer dropped on the table between us. She knew this wasn't going to go the way she'd planned. Her lawyer started with the sympathy angle, exactly as we'd expected. "My client is a woman who has endured years of emotional absence and neglect," he began, launching into the tired narrative they'd clearly rehearsed extensively. They painted me as some kind of cold, detached robot who had left a fragile, vulnerable woman to spiral into desperation and confusion. According to their version of events, her affair wasn't born from calculation or selfishness. It was an understandable response to years of being ignored and emotionally abandoned. I didn't react to any of it. I just sat there and let them tell their carefully constructed story. Then it was our turn. Robert, my lawyer, didn't raise his voice or pace dramatically around the courtroom. He simply laid out the truth piece by methodical piece, the timeline of systematic deception, the location data that proved her lies, the photographs she'd saved like trophies, the screenshots of her messages, the letter she'd sent trying to manipulate me back into submission. And yes, Blake's background and history with other women. At first, Vanessa tried to keep her facial expression completely neutral and controlled. But the cracks in her composure came fast as the evidence mounted. She started whispering urgently to her lawyer, shaking her head in denial, shifting uncomfortably in her chair like she couldn't find a position that felt safe. And when Robert read aloud the message she'd sent to Blake, "He still thinks I'm at Ashley's. He's completely clueless." That was the moment her carefully constructed mask cracked clean down the middle. The judge didn't say much during the proceedings. She just nodded occasionally, asked for clarification on a couple of points, and took detailed notes. But I could see the way her eyes narrowed as she observed Vanessa's body language. Her sudden changes in demeanor and the manufactured vulnerability that didn't quite stick anymore now that the truth was out. Then Vanessa made the tactical error of asking to address the court directly. Her lawyer clearly hesitated, but she stood up anyway because she always needed to reclaim control of any room she was in. "I made mistakes, and I admit that," she said, looking directly at the judge with tears forming in her eyes. "But Tyler and I haven't been truly connected as a married couple for a very long time. He may have evidence of my poor choices, but that doesn't erase how distant and cold he had become. I was emotionally alone for years before I ever looked outside our marriage for companionship." She looked at me then for the first time since walking into the courtroom. Her eyes were wet, but not from genuine remorse. They were wet from pure, undiluted rage because I hadn't folded under pressure, because I hadn't crawled back to her begging for forgiveness, because I had refused to continue being her emotional doormat. My lawyer stood calmly and said, "The plaintiff would like to remind the court that Miss Carter never once communicated any intent to separate prior to beginning her affair. She never sought marriage counseling, never requested time apart to work on issues, never made any attempt at honest communication about problems in the relationship. Her first step when she felt disconnected was infidelity, not healing." We rested our case. The judge dismissed us, reserving her final decision for the following week. As I walked past Vanessa on my way out of the courtroom, her signature perfume hit me. The same scent I used to love, that now smelled like betrayal wrapped in expensive packaging. She whispered without looking directly at me. "You think this makes you the hero of this story?" I stopped and said clearly, "No. It just means I'm no longer the fool." She turned then, eyes burning with fury, lips pressed into a tight line of barely controlled rage. But I was already walking away from her and everything she represented. Outside the courthouse, the sky was overcast and heavy with the promise of rain. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt clean, like stepping out of a violent storm completely naked and scrubbed raw by the experience. The kind of exposed that hurts initially, but ultimately heals you. The following week, the judgment came down from the court, and it was everything I could have hoped for. No spousal support for Vanessa. Asset division that leaned slightly in my favor due to her documented misconduct during the marriage. A mutual no-contact order that would legally prevent her from harassing me or trying to manipulate me back into her toxic orbit. Freedom. Pure, legal, documented freedom. She didn't appeal the decision. Maybe she finally realized that she'd completely exhausted her ability to perform her way out of the consequences of her actions. Or maybe Blake had stopped answering her calls and texts, leaving her without the ego boost she needed to keep fighting battles she couldn't win. I don't know, and honestly, I don't care. What I do know is this. She had played her manipulation game until the entire board collapsed beneath her, and I had walked away holding the only thing she could never fake, steal, or destroy, my self-respect. Life after Vanessa was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty or lonely. It felt earned. There were no more late-night anxiety spikes triggered by her not answering phone calls. No more mental gymnastics required to decode the half-truths she delivered with that practiced smile. No more walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly monitoring my words and actions to avoid setting off one of her emotional landmines. Just silence. Not the kind of silence that isolates you and makes you feel forgotten, but the kind that finally lets you breathe deeply without fear. The divorce judgment had gone through all the proper legal channels, and it was now completely official. I was divorced. The finality of it hit me differently than I thought it would. There was no celebration, no moment of cathartic release, no dramatic sense of closure. Just a slow, strange detachment, as if she had been a particularly vivid bad dream that was finally slipping away in the clear light of morning. I still caught myself sometimes, almost reaching for my phone to text her out of pure habit when something funny happened during my day. Or when I saw one of those ridiculous couples dancing together in the aisles of Target, and I thought for a split second, God, we used to pretend we were that happy too. But the crucial difference now was that I didn't actually miss her. I missed who I thought she was, the version of Vanessa that I had constructed in my mind based on her carefully curated performance. But that woman had never actually existed. When you finally accept that fundamental truth, something almost magical happens. You start to feel genuinely light, like someone has been methodically pulling heavy bricks out of your chest one by one without you even noticing the weight lifting. But the world wasn't quite done throwing curveballs at me yet. 3 weeks after the final court ruling was officially entered, I got an unexpected phone call from Ashley. I debated not answering, given her role in Vanessa's deception, but curiosity got the better of me. She sounded absolutely exhausted, like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. She said she needed to get something off her chest that had been eating at her since the divorce was finalized. Apparently, Vanessa had completely spiraled after losing in court. Not just emotionally, but socially as well. The elaborate stories she'd been telling people to paint herself as the wronged victim had started unraveling under scrutiny. Friends were confronting her about inconsistencies in her narrative, and some people were quietly backing away from her drama entirely. Most tellingly, Blake had completely vanished from her life. He'd ghosted her apparently, left town, blocked her number, disappeared without a trace like he'd never existed at all. I think she genuinely believed she'd walk away from this whole situation with everything, Ashley said quietly. That she'd get the sympathy, keep her friends, maybe even get financial support from you. She thought she could manipulate her way through the legal system just like she manipulated everyone else. I didn't say much in response. What was there to say? She never thought you'd actually fight back, Ashley added after a pause. Honestly, neither did I. You were always so patient with her, so willing to let things slide to keep the peace. That observation stuck with me long after we hung up, because Ashley was right. For too long, I hadn't fought back against Vanessa's manipulation and control. I'd let things slide, compromised my own needs, and convinced myself that patience and understanding made me the stronger person in our relationship. But I'd learned the hard way that silence doesn't always indicate strength. Sometimes it just means submission. and I was never going to make that mistake again. Later that same week, I found one final envelope waiting for me in my mailbox. There was no return address, no identifying marks, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Inside was a single photograph, one I didn't even remember being taken. It showed me and Vanessa from a few years back, sitting together on a beach somewhere. She was laughing at something, leaning against me with genuine joy on her face, and I was looking at her with this completely unguarded smile of pure adoration. In that captured moment, we looked genuinely happy together, like two people who had found something real and lasting. But all I could think while staring at that image was how many lies had already started by the time that photo was taken. How many small betrayals and calculated deceptions were already taking root beneath the surface of what looked like authentic happiness. There was no note accompanying the photograph, and honestly, it didn't need one. The message was clear enough. I slipped the photo into a drawer in my kitchen, not because I wanted to keep it out of nostalgia or sentimentality, but as a reminder of what I should never ignore again. A visual cue to trust my instincts when something feels off, to pay attention to subtle shifts in behavior, to recognize the early warning signs of someone who views relationships as performances rather than partnerships. Because now I could see everything with startling clarity. I had started reconnecting with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. People whose company I'd gradually stopped seeking because Vanessa always found reasons why they weren't worth our time. I was rebuilding my relationship with my brother, having real conversations instead of the surface-level check-ins that had become our norm when I was constantly managing Vanessa's moods and demands. Most importantly, I was reconnecting with myself in ways I hadn't even realized I'd lost. I started running again for the first time in years, pushing my body until my lungs burned and my legs ached, feeling strong and capable in my own skin. I picked up my guitar again and spent evenings playing songs I'd forgotten I loved, letting music fill the space that used to be occupied by anxiety and second-guessing. I even started writing again. Not anything profound or publishable, just honest thoughts about what I'd experienced and learned. Getting the words out of my head and onto paper where I could examine them objectively. Every time I caught a glimpse of my reflection now, I didn't see the broken, confused husband who had spent months questioning his own sanity and wondering what he'd done wrong. Instead, I saw a man who had walked through fire and emerged with his integrity intact, someone who had refused to be reduced to a supporting character in someone else's drama. I saw someone who had finally learned the difference between love and exploitation, between patience and enablement, between forgiveness and self-destruction. But there was still one more chapter that needed to be written, and it would begin with an encounter I never expected to have. I wasn't expecting to see her that day. Not there, not like that, not when I was finally starting to feel like myself again. It was a Sunday afternoon, a little past 2 p.m., and I had just finished having lunch with Chris at this little bistro tucked behind an independent bookstore downtown. He was one of the few people who had stuck by me through the entire nightmare, never judging, never offering empty platitudes, just being present when I needed someone to remind me that normal human relationships still existed. We were walking out of the restaurant, laughing about something completely ridiculous and unimportant. The kind of light, easy conversation that had become precious to me after months of walking through emotional minefields. That's when I saw her. Vanessa was standing across the street, half hidden behind a cafe patio umbrella, wearing oversized sunglasses and a coat that was far too heavy for the mild weather. Despite her attempt to blend into the background, she somehow noticed me first, and our eyes locked across the busy street with no warning, no buildup, no mental preparation. She hesitated for a moment, clearly debating whether to disappear or approach. Then she made her decision and walked over to where Chris and I were standing. She was alone, and her steps were slower and more tentative than I remembered, like someone who wasn't quite sure what they wanted to say or maybe had rehearsed a speech but forgotten the opening lines. I felt my chest tighten, but not with nerves or anxiety. It was more like a strange, bracing calm, the feeling you get when you're standing before a storm you've already survived once and know you can weather again. "Tyler," she said simply. No smirk, no venom, no calculated charm. Just my name, spoken softly and with genuine uncertainty. It didn't sound right coming from her mouth anymore, like a word in a foreign language I'd once known but could no longer understand. I nodded once. "Vanessa." She pushed the oversized sunglasses up onto the top of her head, and I could see that her eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. They were worn down, like she hadn't been resting well for weeks, like the weight of her choices was finally starting to show on her face. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. Neither did I. An awkward pause stretched between us while Chris stepped slightly away to give us space, though I could feel him staying close enough to intervene if needed. She finally spoke again, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I heard about the final ruling from the court. I gave a short, dry laugh. I didn't realize divorce was something to congratulate people on. She bit her lower lip. That old tell that always appeared whenever she was about to lie or spin something just enough to blur the lines between truth and fiction. But this time, surprisingly, she didn't try to manipulate the situation. I was angry about the way things ended between us, she said quietly. About how fast you left, how final you made everything. I looked at her then, really looked at her. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't see her as mine. I didn't see the woman I had married, or even the person I thought I'd known. I saw her clearly. The woman she had become when no one was watching. The person who had weaponized affection and intimacy, who had smiled while systematically lying, who had made me feel like I was the broken one, just so she wouldn't have to confront her own reflection. I didn't leave fast, I said quietly but firmly. You lost me slowly, piece by piece, lie by lie. You just weren't paying attention to what you were destroying. She swallowed hard and blinked several times in rapid succession, like that sentence had hit her harder than she'd expected it to. I was in a really bad place mentally, she said, falling back on the same excuse she'd used in court. I didn't know how to talk to you about what I was feeling. You were always so steady and reliable, and I was constantly spinning out of control. I felt like I couldn't burden you with my problems. I nodded slowly. So instead of asking for help, you decided to light everything on fire. I know, she whispered. The silence stretched between us again, heavy with everything that couldn't be undone or taken back. Then she said the one thing I genuinely didn't see coming. I miss who we were together. Not I miss you. Not I'm sorry for what I did. Just nostalgia for a version of us that maybe had never existed the way she was remembering it. Or maybe had only existed in the moments when she wasn't actively sabotaging it. I didn't answer immediately because, honestly, I didn't miss who we were together. I missed who I had been before her, before I spent years second-guessing every instinct, before I let someone else's chaos and manipulation become my baseline for what love was supposed to feel like. You look lighter, she observed, her eyes scanning my face and posture. I am lighter, I replied simply. That was it. No need to ask how she was doing. No desire to exchange small talk or pretend we could ever be friends. We weren't friends. We weren't anything anymore, and we both understood that. She nodded like she finally grasped that fundamental truth. Well, take care of yourself, she said. You too. She turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of Sunday afternoon pedestrians. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I turned in the opposite direction, back toward the sunlight, back toward my friends, back toward the life I was still building. And for the first time since this entire nightmare had begun, I didn't feel the weight of her shadow trailing behind me anymore. There's something strange about the quiet that comes after a storm. It doesn't hit you all at once like you might expect. Instead, it comes in layers, slowly revealing itself through small moments that accumulate over time. It's waking up and realizing your shoulders aren't permanently clenched anymore. It's drinking your morning coffee without feeling your stomach twist into knots. It's hearing a phone buzz with notifications and not feeling that immediate spike of dread in your throat, wondering what fresh hell is about to be delivered to your inbox. Freedom doesn't announce itself with fanfare or dramatic flourishes, it whispers. And now, months after I walked out of that toxic marriage, that psychological war zone, that elaborate performance where I was cast as the unwitting supporting character, I'm finally starting to hear what real silence is supposed to sound like. Peace. Let me be completely clear about something. Healing doesn't come wrapped in neat, poetic closure. You don't get a final kiss, a redemptive apology, or a perfect cinematic moment where the clouds part and everything suddenly makes sense. Real recovery is messier and more complicated than that. You get random Tuesday mornings where you wake up feeling good for no particular reason. You get sudden panic attacks in the grocery store because someone walks past wearing her perfume and the scent triggers a flood of unwanted memories. You get ridiculous moments of grief that hit you out of nowhere, not for the person who hurt you, but for the version of yourself that never stood a chance against the slow poison of systematic betrayal. But eventually, those difficult moments start to stretch further and further apart. You begin to remember who you were before you spent years constantly apologizing for existing wrong, before you accepted emotional starvation as normal, before you let someone else's voice become so loud in your head that you couldn't hear your own thoughts anymore. I've been rebuilding slowly and deliberately. Not just my living situation, but my entire sense of self. I kept things small and manageable at first, morning workouts at the gym, cooking actual meals instead of ordering takeout every night, reconnecting with people who never made me feel like I had to earn their attention or walk on eggshells to avoid setting them off. I even started going to therapy, and if you're reading this and rolling your eyes at that decision, thinking it's just another cliche, I'm telling you to go anyway. You have absolutely no idea how loud someone else's voice has become in your head until a trained professional points it out and says, "That's not your thought, that's theirs." One session, my therapist asked me a question that completely gutted me. When was the last time you felt truly safe in your own marriage? I couldn't answer immediately because the real answer was never. And that's the hardest truth I've had to confront and accept. Here's what I've learned through all of this. You can love someone deeply and still be completely wrong about who they really are. Vanessa wasn't a partner in any meaningful sense of the word. She was a storm disguised as warmth, someone who wanted control instead of connection, a mirror for her own ego instead of a man to build a life with. For far too long, I handed her every piece of myself, hoping she'd eventually notice the weight of what I was giving and treat it with the respect it deserved. She didn't. She just took everything I offered and smiled while doing it, never once considering the cost to my emotional well-being or sense of self-worth. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're confused, exhausted, constantly wondering if maybe you're the problem in your relationship, let me say this as clearly as I possibly can. Trust your instincts. Those little alarm bells going off in your head aren't anxiety or paranoia. They're intelligence. They're your subconscious mind trying to protect you from something your conscious mind isn't ready to acknowledge yet. The lie that love means tolerating emotional starvation, manipulation, and disrespect is one of the cruelest things our culture teaches people. Love isn't supposed to feel like you're under constant surveillance. A healthy relationship shouldn't make you feel like you're always one mistake away from being discarded or punished. So here's my advice, for whatever it's worth. If someone consistently makes you feel like you're not enough, no matter how much you give or how hard you try, leave. If someone calls your reasonable concerns insecurity or dismisses your valid feelings as drama, run. If you feel more alone and isolated next to them than you do in an empty room, shut the door and walk away. Because no amount of shared history, sexual chemistry, or misguided forgiveness can survive in a relationship that's built on humiliation, control, and emotional manipulation. Vanessa didn't just cheat on me. She systematically erased me, one decision at a time, one lie at a time, one moment of calculated cruelty at a time. She turned me into a stranger in my own life, someone who questioned every instinct and second-guessed every feeling. But I'm here now, still standing, still breathing, still rebuilding myself from the ground up. And more importantly than anything else, I'm finally, genuinely myself again. No more pretending everything is fine when it isn't. No more chasing after someone who views my love as a burden instead of a gift. No more being anyone's emotional trash can or punching bag. Just one man. One life that belongs entirely to me. And a hard-earned silence that I paid for with blood, heartbreak, and the courage to finally walk away from everything I thought I wanted in order to find everything I actually needed. And you know what? It was worth every painful step of the journey.